Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 118 of ThROH The Years, the podcast that reviews Ring of Honor show by show from the beginning. My name is Trevor Dame, joined as always by the co-host Matt Feuerstein, and joined, unfortunately, we could not avoid him forever, the man who has done more guest shots on this show than anyone else by far. You might know him from his wrestling podcast game show, the 5-Star Match Game, home to many a staggering defeat for me and great performances from Matt and our friend Justin Shapiro. I confusing the J people. And you might know him from Joe versus the World, one of the original wrestling podcasts. In fact, I'll point out first off, I'll just say it's Joe Gagne, whoop-de-doo. But I also want to point out, Joe and Matt, you guys have actually covered this show on Joe versus the World 17 years ago. I went back and listened to it, and I'll just say this. Matt sounds younger. Joe sounds exactly the same. Joe, explain.
I don't know, but yeah, when I was trying to look up, did I do any kind of, show report for this? And I'm like, oh no, I did a whole podcast dedicated to this. And I went back and listened, and it was very odd. Like, I don't know if Matt, you went back and listened, but my past self was telling me things I had completely forgotten and, like details that had completely slipped my mind. It was like a message in a bottle from the past in a way. I don't know if you had a chance to listen, Matt.
I skimmed it a little bit. But that wasn't the part that I found odd. Like, it was just like a different version of myself. I mean, I was in my very early 20s and definitely less confident on recording my voice on a microphone. I think and actually I don't even think it was a microphone. I think it was like just talking into an old school cell phone. And so the audio quality was really bad. Like, I think that was how I recorded it. And this is getting personal, but I think if I recall correctly, Joe, you probably don't remember this, but I think I was emailing you that day being like, I'm not sure if I could do the show because I have a family emergency. And I'm not going to get into what that family emergency was, but it was cleared up in time for us to do the show. And I think it was a Monday night after I got back from work. So I started like remembering all these weird details about my life. So yeah, don't do podcasts, everybody, because then it stirs up all sorts of insane memories that you would have completely forgotten.
This is going to be, Matt, your Madeline Cookie, your Proust moment where you relive your entire life from re-listening to an episode of Joe versus the World. I'll also say, Matt, I can't relate to you about the idea of being an uncomfortable and embarrassing. Well, you weren't embarrassing at all, but I mean, I'll just say I've never sounded uncomfortable years and years ago on a Joe Gagne podcast. That's never happened. You can't find evidence of it. Nothing, not a shred of it. But yeah, if anyone who's ever listened to the show, you've probably thought it's too long and I wish Trevor Dame wasn't on it. Well, if you want to listen to a review of this show without those two qualifiers, Joe versus the World, search for it. 17 years old, you can hear a young Matt Feuerstein, a young Joe Gagne review this show and the next show we'll be covering the next night. In fact, you two, when I was looking doing review for this show, you are both thanked in the Observer for that week. So you clearly both, like good little wrestling nerds, sent in reports to Dave Meltzer that week. But yeah, so one bit of housekeeping before we get to the show is this is going to be our last episode on the Pro Wrestling Only Podcast Network. There's no drama behind it. It's we woke up one day and, well, probably over a course of a lot of days, and realized we're like one of the only shows on that network anymore.
Well, it's also that we have to ask, someone, Stephen Graham, who's been a great help to us, and Chad Campbell for years before that, to like help us upload it and do all this extra work that, we don't want to, put that on anybody anymore. Like, considering probably our listenership has mostly shifted over to this feed, and yes, Trevor, to YouTube. So, but I know I'll let you take the lead, but I have more to say about the Pro Wrestling Only Network before you finish. Yeah.
I just want to say that it was a great honor to be asked to be on the Pro Wrestling Only Network all those years ago. If you've listened to the show, to the entire history, you'll know, how big a fans we were of shows on it. And if, Chad Campbell asking us to be on when we were big fans of his show Where the Big Boys Play, and so many other great shows, including Stephen Graham shows and so many people. I will still say, go back whenever, if you want to listen to like great classic, like historical wrestling podcasts about older stuff, it's still one of the best places. And there's so much stuff in the archives. You'll have to hunt for it, but so much good stuff. It was honored to be on, but I want to make sure everyone knows this is going to be the last episode we're going to ask to be put on that feed because we feel like most people have migrated. But if you are someone that is still listening just through that, you're going to have to either go to, as Matt said, on YouTube or our own feed, which you can easily find if you just search the name of the show on any podcast app, whatever search site you like. But yeah, thank everybody for the run. It's been great. Matt, is there anything else you wanted to say?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many people who were involved in making that network, a really great place to find wrestling podcasts and to host wrestling podcasts over the past 6 or 7 years. So I don't want to start naming names just because I'm sure I'll forget important people, but it really was so exciting to be asked to be on that because it was a podcast network that I already listened to. Lots of great shows that inspired this podcast in the first place. So just being on it was, I think, kind of elevated our show immensely and helped us out a ton. But, every era comes to an end at some point. And, we just want to thank everybody involved who helped us, everybody who listened on that podcast network, everybody who is still listening to us on that network, and everybody involved in it. It was an honor, pun intended.
And finally, before we start the show, I told the guys before the show I have a prop because I remember if this was the start of the episode where you and Matt of Joe versus the World, where you covered this show, or the other episode you recorded a few months later that I mistakenly listened to for a few minutes before I realized it was the wrong episode. But either way, Joe found a beer in his fridge. He just had to show off how cool he was. He's like, I'm going to crack this live on the show. Well, guys, I know how to party. I've got a Dr. Pepper Zero Sugar here, so I've never drank a carbonated beverage while doing the podcast before, so we are in a bold, dangerous territory here. I'm going to have to manage that. But
are we stealing the Elite Beach shtick? Is this the ThROH The Years pop of the week? I think we are. Treasure.
I think this is a crazy time, Matt, because normally I drink water, so this is.
Yeah, I was gonna say, well, I love listening to the Elite Beat, but I always thought I'd be a terrible guest on that show because I pretty much only drink tap water. I have nothing to pop.
I am so jealous of someone that lives in an area where you can actually just drink the tap water and enjoy it. So
people say that New York City has some of the best in the country. I only know my experience that I drink it, and hopefully it's not going to ruin my life.
Well, on to something that will ruin your life, the current episode of ThROH The Years. Lots of news happened in the world of Ring of Honor between the last show and this show. We've had pretty thin news sections. This one's pretty chunky, and there's some interesting stuff here that I forgot about. And okay, so the biggest story that I would say that happened between the last Ring of Honor show and this one would be Kurt Angle got fired by the WWE. This was the time, in 2006 when he got fired where, he was physically breaking down, taking some pills that you probably shouldn't take so many of. WWE got scared of his health and just let him go. And he became, well, I'll go to the Observer and you'll find out what the Ring of Honor connection is here in a second. Dave Meltzer wrote in the Observer, with his body breaking down and painkiller issues now public after being fired on August 25th by World Wrestling Entertainment, Kurt Angle finds himself in a unique situation. He is now the single most in-demand individual perhaps in the history of the industry. He now has the ability to, at least on a short-term basis, make more money than he ever has before, and perhaps in the process, destroy his body even further. While a few will publicly say so, virtually every major promotion, from Ring of Honor to several groups in Japan to UFC and numerous other MMA groups, and everyone in between, have expressed interest from curiosity to extreme interest in using Angle as soon as he heals up from his current batch of injuries. Now, of course, Angle would pick in the coming weeks TNA, and we'll go to an Observer now from a few weeks later after he had signed with TNA. Dave would write, TNA has also decided against booking Angle for any independent dates, which shows a concern for not wanting to have him work more than a few dates per month. Originally, word was getting out that Angle would be available for outside bookings through TNA for $5,000 per shot. Ring of Honor in particular was going to make a play for multiple dates on him at that price, as well as attempt to get a DVD interview deal. So you think, wow, that's pretty big. And then at the same time, the Pro Wrestling Torch reported this. ROH management is claiming they have had no talks with Kurt Angle about coming into Ring of Honor. So depends on who you believe there. Obviously, Davis is a lot more specific. But I just was thinking, so first off, I went back and I looked. That probably would have been the priciest talent deal ROH had offered at that time, because I looked back. Dave had said that Terry Funk cost $2,500 when he came in for Glory by Honor 2 in 2003. Kenta Kobashi, Dave claimed, was $9,000 for 2 shows. So $5,000 a shot. And apparently ROH was interested in doing multiple dates at that price. I was just thinking, like, what would they have done? Because I have to imagine that TNA would not have wanted them to do Samoa Joe, because they had just, they were about to do that as their big program right off the bat for Kurt Angle. You probably couldn't have done Bryan Danielson, because you wouldn't have want him to lose.
All right. I'm gonna stop you right there. You really think they would have not done Bryan Danielson versus Kurt Angle just because they wouldn't want to job Bryan Danielson? I can't buy that.
Well, if he was champ, they didn't do it with Christian. They did it that weird tag match. They have a singles match for them.
Kurt Angle is a whole different thing than Christian was at that time.
How dare you, sir?
I know. I mean, Christian. No, I mean, it's different now. Kurt Angle was a much bigger star than Christian in 2006. I know. No, it would have been Bryan Danielson, and it would have been fine if Danielson did the job. That's my take. That's my stance. I'm sticking to it.
Okay, so if we're going by multiple shots, who would have you picked then, assuming that Joe's off, you can do one with Danielson, who would have been your second match? Like, if you could pick anyone on the roster at this point.
Well, usually they would do a singles and a tag, right?
Yeah.
That was usually the move when they brought in like a huge name like a Liger or a Kobashi. So, maybe Danielson one night, and then maybe, Kurt Angle and Nigel against Danielson and someone, maybe Danielson and Joe, maybe even Danielson and Homicide, since they, that's the thing they've done for some of those big dream tag matches where they have enemies or rivals team up against the big star. Sometimes that happens. They could have even done Angle versus Nigel at that point, and Nigel definitely could have done a job for Kurt. But honestly, my takeaway from all this is just how scummy the wrestling business is. Like, Angle was fired by WWE because, as Wade Keller had put it in a vague news report a little bit before Angle was let go, that he was on, quote, death watch at the time. Like, he was in really bad shape. He's even admitted it since. So it's pretty crazy just how, obviously no one is surprised to hear this. It's still like this, but how craven the wrestling business is and was, and I guess maybe always will be.
Yeah, like, I get, that's a great point to bring up, because for people that now, obviously, Kurt Angle is okay, presumably, although he had a lot of surgeries, and like Matt just said, is very on the record about some really long-lasting, deep struggles with painkiller addiction and things. But at this time, the thought was WWE was firing Kurt Angle just because they thought they were going to have like a Brian Pillman type situation. Like, this guy could just die one day on our watch, and if he's not going to get help, we're not going to let this happen, under our auspices. And everybody, according to the Observer story, basically was lining up to sign him. And they're lucky, TNA, I will say, that it turned out as well as it did, because there is plenty of plausible alternate realities where that could have gone way worse. But
no, it's nice to see. It's nice to see Kurt. Like, when you see him talk now, like, he seems lucid and happy. And if you heard him back in the 2006 era, he was like a shell mentally of himself, at least the way he came across on TV. Like, just lost a lot of that spark and that gleam behind his eye that kind of made him special. And he was still great, obviously, in TNA, but there were times where it's just like, this is not the Kurt Angle that, that we all came to love. And it was sad. And, hopefully he's doing as well as he seems to be.
So another news story is there was a big kind of lucha show where it was like a crossover where a lot of the TNA talent got brought in. And Dave wrote this, which I thought was interesting in the Observer. He wrote about this show. It was kind of a big deal, more among the wrestlers than the fans, for AJ Styles, Samoa Joe, Low-Ki, and Homicide to be there, as ROH tapes are real popular with younger wrestlers in Mexico. And I just thought it's interesting because a lot of times people see lucha as such a like a separate world, completely like less crossover than like other wrestling cultures. But it was interesting just to see, even back in 2006, not nowadays, but like 2006, that, it was already a big deal among the younger wrestlers in Mexico to be like, hey, we know you guys from Ring of Honor. And of course, it's another one of those classic TNA stories where it's like, TNA always resented that like their talent got known for Ring of Honor and not TNA. This is another example. The wrestlers are not excited to be like, hey, we watch TNA. It's like, hey, we see you from Ring of Honor tapes, even though this is an Impact versus, a TNA versus AAA branded show. So another cute little story there. Then a story I forgot about, again from The Observer. This is from their Pro Wrestling Noah news section. Mitsuharu Masawa and Yoshiyuki Nakamura of 01 Max are said to be starting a new overseeing body of pro wrestling called the Global Pro Wrestling Alliance, apparently partnered after the old NWA. They claim the promotions under the umbrella will be Noah, 01 Max, IWA Japan, El Dorado Pro Wrestling, which is a Japanese indie group, Kaintai Dojo, Kensuke Office, DDT, Big Mouth Loud, European Wrestling Alliance, Hardly Races World League Wrestling, Ring of Honor, and Pro Wrestling World 1. They claim the top indie guys like Minoru Suzuki and Yoshihiro Takayama would be affiliated. Kaiji Muda was asked to work with them and turned them down. With Masawa's ties, the group is said to be having a TV show on NTV, which was a major channel in Japan. I forgot this happened, so I was like, I'm going to search into this, like, why don't I remember this? And it's because this went defunct basically within a year. They ran 3 shows in Japan with this branding. Ring of Honor had no one on those shows except Morishima defended the RH title on one of them. But what's interesting is it was supposed to be like this big, like Dave said, like an NWA talent share. There was even talk they were going to start like setting aside money for like pensions for older retired wrestlers in the group. They were going to like coordinate all their shows so they didn't run on the same, and it just very quickly fell apart. And I found an article someone wrote, forgive me for not having credit here, but they were writing like one of the things in 2007 why they were saying like it looks like this is falling apart is they were like, Noah isn't sending talent to any of these groups usually except Ring of Honor. Like Ring of Honor was the one company of all those long companies that seemed to be getting like the most benefit of this, which is, it's an interesting thing of what could have been, all these kind of things like this. Another story about the weird Japanese like landscape at this time and how much things have changed. Getting back to The Observer, that Dave wrote, the Dragon Gate wrestlers are booked for WrestleMania weekend with Ring of Honor next year. Noah has no problems with working with Dragon Gate, but it's clear Noah has become the favored nation, and there are other political issues that could get involved, having to do with Japanese television. Dragon Gate is also negotiating a deal to work with New Japan, which many in Japan think is a terrible idea because their main eventers will be exposed when it comes to size and come across as mid-cutters in the big leagues. Plus, everyone who works with New Japan ends up with migraines for their trouble. What a crazy world it is now where it's like Dragon Gate guys will be exposed by their size when like Shingo now goes there, becomes like a main eventer in IWGP Heavyweight Champion for a little spell. And also it's interesting. It is crazy how quickly it changed where, at WrestleMania weekend it was like the huge thing was, oh, Dragon Gate. And really within a few months, like we're going to see now the Noah connection's only going to get deeper. It's like, it's much more a Noah relationship with Dragon Gate here and there. Although they will have their own connections coming up soon, but.
Yeah, Noah is definitely the more impactful. I mean, Noah gets to have one of their wrestlers win the ROH title, obviously. So that right there is example enough.
And then our last story before we get to the show, we touched on this on the last show, but this is where it became official. Meltzer wrote in The Observer, Nana Bando, also known as Prince Nana, manager of the heel group The Embassy, quit Ring of Honor. He wanted to do more, including wrestle after he lost so much weight. According to Gabe Sapolsky, Nana didn't see wrestling going much farther for him, and he wanted to concentrate on other things. So yeah, apparently that was Nana's choice to leave. I looked up Cage Match, and obviously Cage Match doesn't always catch everything a guy does. But Nana like takes a bunch of months off, and then he basically just he does wrestle, but basically just for 2 Northeast Indies for like a year or 2, and then he comes back to Ring of Honor. So yeah, he doesn't really have a big in-ring wrestling career, but it's interesting that, I guess he just saw himself kind of in in a rut maybe, or not getting to spread his wings, but
So
it is nice to see.
just reminds us how nice it is to see him getting a major television role so many years later. It feels just like, things coming full circle and somebody who really deserves it getting his flowers, much later on.
Absolutely. So that brings us to the show we're going to cover tonight. It is Glory by Honor 5, Night 1. It took place September 15th, 2006 at a tent in East Windsor, Connecticut in front of a reported crowd of 500 fans. If you're going, a tent? Yes, it happened in a tent. We'll get to in a second why. But I think, long time through the years listeners or really good memory having Ring of Honor fans will know this isn't even the first Ring of Honor show they ran in a tent, because the first one they ran in a tent was Generation Next, and that was because the Philadelphia National Guard Armory got mobilized, I believe, with a few days' notice, and they had told them, you're not going to be able to use the building even though you booked it, and they had to run a tent in right beside it. This time was different. We'll go to the Observer, and then I guess I'll ask Joe for some live thoughts, but in the Observer, Dave wrote, there was a problem with the building, so they ended up pitching a large tent on the adjacent soccer field. The show actually came very close to being canceled until a lot of things came together. What happened is the building they've been running never had the correct permits to hold pro wrestling. Nobody knew better, but somehow just days before the show, inspectors came to the building and told them that they weren't zoned for it. That's all been taken care of, and on December 22nd, they'll have filed the right paperwork, but by the time they found out, there was no time for this show. The tent wouldn't have been a problem either, except it was pouring rain. They packed about 500 people into the tent, and then the tent leaked, so rain was getting inside, and some people had to stand outside because it was an open-air tent and were getting rained on as well. The tent was so low that it made it impossible to do some regular top rope moves. Overall, the wrestling was said to be excellent, but will probably be one of the rare shows that comes off better on DVD than live because of the building problems. The Torch actually talked to Gabe Sapolsky, the booker, directly. ROH Booker, according to this is the PW Torch, ROH Booker Gabe Sapolsky tells PW Torch that the September 15th show in East Windsor, Connecticut was in danger of being canceled, but he was pleased with the end result after having to deal with holding the event under a tent with a driving rain outside. Quote, I thought it was a great event. The final two matches were both off the charts, he says. The word going around the event was that ROH had oversold the show and the local fire department forced to move outside, which caused a lot of stress for Sapolsky and the ROH office in the days leading up to the event. It was a very, very stressful couple of days for the office as the show literally came hours from being canceled. Quote, unfortunately, we were hit with some rain. If it was 24 hours earlier or 24 hours later and it was a beautiful night out, there would have been no complaints. Unfortunately, we got unlucky with the rain. It will definitely give the show a different atmosphere, and I can't thank the fans enough for understanding. Joe, obviously I've already listened to you back, the 17 years younger Joe, but do you have any memories to this day? Like, you've been to a lot of wrestling shows live, like how unique was it to be in a tent during a downpour of rain for the show? It's on grass. You see when wrestlers go to take dives on the show, they come up with grass on their backs. Like, was this one of the more memorable settings you've ever seen a wrestling show in?
Oh, absolutely. And it's worth noting this was it was 2006, so nobody had like iPhones or anything. So I don't know if there was a late notice on maybe ROH website, maybe someone on the message board posted about it. But given it was a Friday show and to beat traffic, I had left pretty early. And I remember, I got some dinner and I arrived at the building and I noticed there's this big yellow tent on the field next to the building, and I'm like, oh, that's so strange. I wonder what that's for. Is that for like a graduation of some kind? And then it's like, well, no, it's September, and we're at like a sports place. Like, who's going to graduate? And then I realized there's a ring there, and that meme where it's like like it's two paths, and one is like the dark and stormy castle, and the other is like this sunny field, and it was like that, and everyone's headed towards the tent, and it's like, oh no, is this where the show is? And turns out it was, and I don't think they ever gave an official explanation. It was given all the building problems they've had in Massachusetts, it wasn't too hard to figure something went wrong. It's like, well, okay, we're in a tent. So, and, it's not too bad they couldn't, I don't know whether they could have held the show outside if the weather held up. It was, September. I think it was a fairly nice night. That would have been a cool atmosphere, but we were packed like sardines inside the tent. I remember where I was sitting. I got it was basically water torture at one point because I was under a drip and it was just like dripping on my hat continuously. And some crowds have been torture, but this was almost like literal torture. And I also remember thinking, like, are we going to die? Because, like, there's all this electrical equipment and it's pouring rain. Like, is there going to be, like, a lightning strike and, 500 wrestling fans have been wiped out, because of what a way to go. And
yeah, but
we
you couldn't have died and gone to heaven, because watching the Ring Crew Express wrestle Rhett Titus and Peli Primo, that's already heaven.
Yeah. Some might say so. I mean, it certainly was unique. I don't know if that translates to good, because the tent had certainly an effect on the show, and in some ways, for the worse, as it limited movement, but in some ways for the better. But we'll get into that.
Isn't it insane that ROH had to have two different shows all of a sudden, like at a last minute tent, in like less than 3 years? Like, that's very unusual for any wrestling company to ever have to do that. And ROH had it to do it twice in not that long of a span of time. That's really crazy.
Yeah, I remember. Feel like this one was maybe less warning than the last one. Like Joe just said, like, he did not know till he got to the building.
Yeah, this definitely seemed like a worse tent than the first one.
Yeah. For those who, like Joe mentioned, we'll bring up the instances, I'm sure, as we cover the matches. But this was not the Generation Next tent, which was high. This was like the tent. I guess if you're not watching it. The point of it, the apex is right over the center of the ring, but it very quickly slopes down to a degree where if you stand on any of the corner turnbuckles, your head's already like touching, like you have to push up on the tent, and that will limit a bunch of the wrestling on the show. And it is crazy that they couldn't even get like a great tent. Again, like, yeah, you watch the show, you can see the fans are like right to the very edge of where the tent line is. Like, they're just trying to get under the tent. And apparently, as Joe said, like, that did not save them. The rain was dripping. If you listen to, I think in particular, the Nigel McGuinness, Christopher Daniels one, I don't know if you're just watching your TV, but if you're like me and we're like listening on headphones, if you listen very closely, like, you can hear like the dull sounds of the rain pounding the tent. Like, this was not a good night to run a wrestling show in a tent. But on the Pro Wrestling Torch wrote that ROH is counting on Glory by Honor 5 weekend to be one of the biggest sets of events in the history of the company. ROH has loaded both cards of standout matches. So again, they were like, man, this is going to be a great weekend. And we're starting off with rainy tent. And then a couple other quick notes. The Ring of Honor website, I love this. They wrote this on the Ring of Honor website before the show. This was on September 11th, so I don't know why I ever forgot that they wrote this. Since Jimmy Rave will not be at this weekend's events, toilet paper will be banned except in the bathrooms. If you throw TP this weekend, you will be ejected. So we are going to a new era of Ring of Honor where the TP is going to get ramped, like going to be taken out. And if you're wondering why wasn't Jimmy Rave on this big weekend, he was actually on a tour of Dragon Gate. I think this is his first tour of Dragon Gate. So no Jimmy Rave, no toilet paper allowed. I don't know exactly. Maybe they just decide, you know what? If it's not for Jimmy, this is too much of a hassle. And we were getting to the point, I believe, where we were starting to see Matt, like, occasionally, like, toilet paper was getting thrown at wrestlers that were not Jimmy Rave. So I could see them thinking, maybe this is starting to get kind of ridiculous. I think Kerry Silken on other podcasts all these years later has been on the record that he was, like, not a big fan of the toilet paper. So I could see them going, well, look, if Jimmy's not going to be here, this is a good excuse just to tell them, don't bring the goddamn toilet paper. But maybe this would have been a good time for the toilet paper. You could have sopped up some of the moisture here. But another quick
note. They could throw, like, more thicker paper towels instead.
Patch up the leaks with some good Charmin, not the cheap stuff. But this is also, we should bring up, this DVD is only 2 hours and 31 minutes long. This is one of the shorter releases we've ever covered through the years. Most events are at least 3 hours, and now since they've gone to the fancier encoded DVDs, oftentimes we'll get to like 3:15 because of that.
There were some that were 3.5 that we reviewed recently.
And because of that, they actually put on the DVD a bonus match each from FIP and Shimmer. I actually even looked up what the matches were. You got Sarah Del Rey versus Rain from Shimmer, and the Heartbreak Express versus Black Market from FIP. And finally, you got one other thing on the DVD, something that had just been released on YouTube before this show, which I think merits some discussion. And that's The Victory of Love, which was the second of the Jimmy Jacobs music video trilogy. They included this. You can still find this on YouTube. The promo from Jimmy. Jimmy says wrestlers have an unparalleled ability to wrestle through injuries. He says in St. Paul, he blew out his knee wrestling Homicide, which maybe explains why we criticized Matt. That match was not that good at all. I had no idea he blew out his knee wrestling Homicide during that match. So, now I feel guilty for criticizing it quite as hard. I had no idea. But he says, he blew out his knee that night, but he kept going. He says the next night he had to wrestle with the worst injury he ever had, though. You see, he's wrestled with bone chips in his elbows, concussions, severely damaged sciatic nerve, broken fingers, broken toes, a broken wrist. But that night, he wrestled BJ Whitmer with a broken heart. Because he says after the match with Homicide, he saw his baby, Lacey, having sex with Colt Cabana in the shower, which, again, you didn't see him having sex. They were fully clothed, just kissing. Anyway, he says to say his heart was torn is an understatement. It might not have shown in x-rays, but his heart was broken in 7 different places, man. Lacey told him 2 times before to take BJ out in matches, and each time it didn't happen. But that next night, that time, powered by love, he broke BJ's ankle, and now BJ's going to be out for months. Jimmy says he's not down anymore because the adoration of the heart holds victory over the sins of the flesh. He says whatever physical attraction Lacey and Cole have, it doesn't match up to love. So he's rededicating himself with a new love song. Jimmy is sure the fans will think this new song will be him all bummed out and crying about Lacey with another guy. But no, this song is an upbeat one. It's about the biggest victory of all, the victory of love. We then get another great Jimmy Jacobs music video, another ballad. It starts with Jimmy journaling that it's been 232 days since he professed his love to Lacey and 44 days since he came along. But he knows he's one day closer to being with her. So he's literally counting the days. We then get the song. We get lines like, tears wash away the makeup from my eye. And I believe, like Ducky said to Andy, girl, I'd die for you. So a 16 Candles reference. We get visuals like Jimmy writing JJ and L in a heart in the sand on the beach, which I love. Like Lacey in canon does not have a last name, or if she does, Jimmy does not know it.
The best part though was when all the women on the beach, or on the dock, surround him. And then he's like, no, I can't do it. And he just jumps into the water to escape them because he's saving himself for Lacey and Lacey only.
We also get Jimmy petting a cat. We get Jimmy sitting in front of a tombstone marked Jacobs. And then, like Matt said, the most ridiculous part, the girls on the dock surround a shirtless Jimmy just walking on the docks shirtless, as you do. And he's like, whoa, women, and just jumps into the water. And then in the strangest part of all, it ends with an audio clip of Jeremy Piven from the 2001 romantic comedy or drama Serendipity saying, the Greeks didn't write obituaries. They only asked one question after a man died. Did he have passion? I don't know why he included that clip of all clips.
Did you identify that yourself?
No, I had to Google that. I Googled it because I was like, I have to know. I could tell by the voice it was Jeremy Piven, but I was like, this is not a famous movie quote. I was like, what the hell? And so I Googled it. It's from the 2001 movie Serendipity. I was like, what the fuck? But it's the most bizarre choice to put in this, but this is free on YouTube still, worth going out of your way to see. It's not as good as the Ballad of Lacey, but it's pretty good. So we open the DVD proper after all of that with the Briscoes backstage. Jay says tonight ROH brings in the GHC heavyweight champion Marufuji, but you think the Briscoes are scared of him? Jay says they've beaten Kenta down multiple times. Tonight will be no different. Jay says Mark says they haven't forgotten about Homicide and Samoa Joe tomorrow night either. Time to man up. We then get 2 dark matches that do not make the DVD, just student matches. Alex Payne defeats Bobby Dempsey. Derek Dempsey defeats Mitch Franklin. And then we get the opener that we do see on DVD. The Ring Crew Express of Don Marcos defeat Pele Primo and Rhett Titus in 2 minutes, 3 seconds when Marcos pinned Titus after he hit the senton off the shoulders of Dunn. I'd call this a squash, except the team that lost in 2 minutes got almost all of the offense. The students actually kind of dominated the match till near the end. Guys, I don't know if you have any thoughts on this. I will say if you want a little bit of Ring of Honor trivia, this is the first match Rhett Titus ever had on a Ring of Honor main card, unless you count him working against Samoa Joe and Adam Pearce with Pelly as hardcore wrestlers number 1 and 2 at Supercard of Honor, but they were wearing masks and not as themselves. But, Rhett Tice, one of the longest, tenured wrestlers in Ring of Honor. This is his start on the main card as himself. But, guys, you have any thoughts about this before we get to the other Dunn and Marcos match?
Everything they did looked fine. That's all I can say about it.
Rhett and Pelly had a terrible version of Blitzkrieg Bop for their entrance music. And
they did.
Extended my thoughts.
The other thing is, you'll notice at this match and for the rest of the night, for some reason, I guess because of the tent, the hard camera, whenever they cut to the hard camera, it's kind of off to the side, which is really one of those things that just bugs me. It's almost felt like they were relying then more on the handheld cam, because it was like they almost didn't want to cut as much to the hard cam because it was kind of to an angle, I guess, to accommodate the tent and the fans. But another little weird thing you'll notice. So Chris Hero and Claudio Castagnoli then make their way through the crowd to ringside as the crowd explodes and "fuck you, Hero" chants. Hero gets on the mic and says he'd like to let all the fans here know that he loves them too. Hero says this is a very big weekend for Ring of Honor because it's the one where the Kings of Wrestling show their dominance in ROH. They're the best tag team in wrestling today. Hero and Claudio challenge Dunn and Marcos, and it's on. And we get the Kings of Wrestling of Chris Hero and Claudio Castagnoli defeating the Ring Crew Express in 5 minutes, 20 seconds when Hero pins Marcos after he and Claudio hit him with the KRS-1, which stands for Kings Reign Supreme Over Everyone. In addition to this match being on the show, this aired in full for free on the next ROH Video Wire online. And this was kind of like, even though technically the Kings of Wrestling had one match in Ring of Honor as a team during the CZW feud, I think that was versus like Adam Pearce and maybe BJ Whitmer. That really didn't really show off like the kind of wrestling they were famous for in places like Chikara. Matt, what do you think about this? This is definitely a much more showing what they bring, almost like a reintroduction of them, I would say, to Ring of Honor fans.
Yeah, this is a true squash. Obviously the Ring Crew Express gets some hope spots, but I actually like the way you called it a reintroduction, because to me, Claudio has been very much at sea for a while in the ROH stuff we've been watching for the past, few months. And this is like, okay, now Claudio gets to be Claudio. He does that spot where he has, both of the Ring Crew Express's legs over his shoulders, and he does like a spin. He's getting to show like, okay, he's a really impressive physical specimen, which he hadn't really been doing in a while. And obviously that's one thing that, to this day we all like about Claudio is how strong he is and the things he could do. And, they do some of their cool double team spots, and it's just like, I don't know. I feel like this, more than anything, this is almost like a rehabilitation of Claudio in one squash match. Hero is Hero, and he's great to watch, but I've been really disappointed in how they'd presented Claudio for a while, and this, it made my heart swell to see him get to actually not be booked as a dork for once. I also thought it was funny that they had Gabe come in to do commentary to make fun of Chris Hero and do this like inside joke about Chris Hero fake posting on a message board about himself. Like, I don't totally remember the details, but I remember vaguely something about this. But it seems a little inside even for an ROH DVD.
So yeah, I wrote in my notes, Gabe goes on mic, even though, it's Dave Prazak and MSL on commentary as Jared David. But Gabe goes on commentary during this match, and he goes, "It's misting outside right now," so he's letting you know it's raining. And then he adds, "What kind of guy is Chris Hero to go online on his live journal and claim he's the tag champ because he stole the tag belts?" Gabe then wonders, what's Chris Hero going to do next? Fake posting on message boards about himself? And I wrote my notes, Matt. I have no idea if this is a shot at Rob Feinstein, a shot at Gabe himself, or one of 100 possible wrestlers, because so many people during this era posted on wrestling message boards not as themselves. Because I believe Rob was like, I think Phil Schneider talked about that when he gets on the show, that Rob would post under pseudonyms on the Death Alley Driver board. I think Gabe was known for posting as people that were not Gabe Sapolsky on the Ring of Honor message board. So I think, and wrestlers definitely did this. So who knows who Gabe is talking? Probably himself, probably poking fun at himself, but who knows?
Sometimes it would happen so much that even my own posts, I'd wonder if I was secretly a wrestling star.
Joe, what do you think about this? And also, were you one of the fans chanting plastic belts at the Kings of Wrestling who had brought their Chikara titles to the show?
I thought the Chikara belts looked fine. I would not partake in that chant. But this was basically the equivalent of like a Steiner's State Patrol match on Worldwide. Not really competitive, and the chance for the superior team to show off their cool moves, which they did in abundance. So that was a win.
Yeah, I thought this was them showing off way more of their kind of almost kind of convoluted, kind of wacky Chikara, like intricate double teams and stuff like Matt mentioned. It was a cool spot where Claudio drapes both of Dunn and Marcos upside down over his shoulders, basically by the legs, and then like spins like a giant swing. And then he stops so Hero can tie their arms together, which doesn't really do a thing, and then double drop kick their heads as they're held upside down. And then I thought the KRS one is such a cool finisher. It's such a simple finisher, but it's cool where, for those who haven't seen it, you know, Claudio and Hero, who are two tall boys, they hold the guy so that basically the guy's planking on their shoulders. Their opponent's just like held out, so he's draped over their shoulders. And then they count down like, 1, 2, 3. I guess that's counting up. Or 3, 2, 1. I don't know if they count up or count down. Anyway, they throw the guy way in the air and then kind of flip him as he's in midair, and the guy just kind of falls down on their back. It doesn't mean they're just throwing a guy in the air real high, but it looks really cool. And that was the finisher. You get the first dive onto grass on this show, and funny little bit of little detail you can see. You can actually hear Chris Hero turn to Marcos as he pins him and tell him thank you right after he pins him. So very polite, that Chris Hero. This was actually Dunn and Marcos, the Ring Crew Express's final match ever in Ring of Honor. So, Matt,
that's crazy.
I know. Yeah, it's I can't say Dunn and Marcos are a team that should have had more in Ring of Honor. I think they were booked pretty exactly where they should have been. But I do think, like, they deserve some roses. They were a very fun, kind of niche little tag team. I think, they were fun as the team that got squashed, and they were fun occasionally, like, getting a mini push very rarely, like that the Carnage Crew feud, I think was enjoyable. It's going to be sad to see him go, even though they were almost never booked by this point. This night was their last hurrah, and they're using it to put over a new team for Ring of Honor.
They basically always delivered in terms of being entertaining and getting the crowd behind them. Like, pretty much always. They were good in the scramble matches. They were good in those, like, brawling matches that they had occasionally. I think that they're an underrated team. If anyone had ever gotten behind them and like really like believe in them, I think they could have risen to the occasion and been even better and been a team on a level. But I think probably people didn't think that they had the look or certain type of charisma to carry that. But I was always thoroughly entertained by pretty much everything they ever did in ROH. And
yeah.
It sounds like the crowd was too. So, it's going to be sad to see them go, but, they've also been off our radar for a while because they're barely used at all at this point anyway.
It's kind of shocking. Go on.
I was going to say they were certainly a staple of early Ring of Honor. Everyone remember them, I think, pretty fondly. And, I kind of wonder, like, what if they had gotten that kind of miracle world tag team title run that, who was it? It was Tony Mamaluke and Sal Renaro. That didn't really go anywhere. What if the Ring Crew Express have gotten that? Would they have paid any more dividends? But like Matt said, they were probably booked pretty properly, given all things considered.
And then we go to Christopher Daniels backstage. Daniels says he hasn't forgotten the last time he wrestled Nigel McGuinness for the Peer title in Dayton, and Nigel threw a photographer at him in order to win by countout. But Daniels also says that he's noticed a change in McGuinness's behavior in recent months. He saw his valiant recent battles with Bryan Danielson. Daniels says the question he has now is he facing that Nigel that cuts corners to win, or is he facing this new Nigel that battles valiantly and never says die? Daniel says, though, he doesn't care. He puts over Nigel's recent accomplishments, but then he says people have forgotten who Christopher Daniels really is, that he's God's gift to professional wrestling. He says tonight he's going to remind the Ring of Honor fans who he really is by reminding Nigel how good he can be. I actually thought this was one of Daniel's better ROH promos in a long time. Like, it was one of those impassioned, not only, like, it was impassioned, but it was also one of those promos where a wrestler basically cuts his opponent's promo for him, because I feel like the commentators haven't done as good as a job as Daniels did in this promo of like establishing that, oh, Nigel's is starting to act more face-ish. He's not cheating as much, and he's kind of changing, and Daniels really like lays it out all for you right here. And then I even like the way he kind of frames this match. He like kind of gives this match that doesn't have stakes, but kind of framing it as like, this is a match where I've got to prove to everybody like that I'm back on track, that I'm haven't lost a step here in Ring of Honor. So I actually thought this was a really good promo. And then we move on. We immediately cut to Nigel McGuinness backstage, and he directly responds to Daniel's promo. So he must have gotten a copy of this DVD in advance, through like that scene in Spaceballs where they have a tape of the movie as the movie is happening, and they catch up to the movie. But anyway,
ROH is so much like Spaceballs. Finally, somebody said it.
Definitely surrounded by assholes. But saying that Nigel, he says, the Nigel that cuts corners and the valiant fighter are one and the same, Sunshine. He says, either way, I get the job done and I win. Nigel does put over Daniels, but then he says, I'm going to use this wave of momentum I'm on right now to take the GHC heavyweight title for Naomichi Marufuji tomorrow. So a very quick Nigel promo to kind of counter the Daniels promo. And that brings us to our second match, the four-corner survival match. Jack Evans defeats Colt Cabana, Jimmy Jacobs, who was escorted to the ring by Lacey, and Ricky Reyes in 13 minutes, 5 seconds, when Jack pinned Jacobs after hitting a forward flipping leg drop off the top rope. Before the match, Colt has Bobby Cruz make an announcement. Colt would like to clear something up. He and Lacey did not reach third base in the bushes 40 minutes ago. The fans at that point chant, yes, you did.
Yeah, that genius and subtle crowd that chants, yes, you did. I wanted to like show them all that Rainer Wolfcastle meme that was like, that's the joke.
Colt then gives Lacey a smack on the ass, which she isn't when she isn't looking. A fan desperately tries to start a chant of smell his fingers, which thankfully does not catch on. Jimmy pouts, which he'll be doing a lot throughout the match. And then as the match starts, Jack Evans says, Lacey's a catch. And he gets the crowd to chant that Colt's a pimp. But
I like the dichotomy between Lacey's a catch, which is kind of an old-fashioned expression, and Colt's a pimp, which is much newer, and I just thought that was a funny dichotomy between two concepts. She's a catch, so if you date her, you're a pimp. Like,
yeah, I was about to say something similar, which I thought was funny. Like the crowd's chanting "slut" at Lacey before the match. Someone was offering her dollars. The crowd was chanting "she's a crack whore," and then Jack Evans gets in there and he's like, "She's a catch." Like I was like, that's kind of sweet and quaint.
It is.
Missed this.
I'm imagining like my old Jewish grandmother saying to me, like if I was dating somebody, like, oh, she's a real catch. My baby is such a pimp. That was not really an impression of my Jewish grandmother. Let me try this again. Oh, honey, she's a real catch. My baby's such a pimp. That's also a bad impression, but it's closer.
You know what, Matt? None of us know, so you could have gotten away and told us that was a perfect impression. But Joe, what'd you think about this match, which is a lot of comedy? And also, could you do an impression of your grandmother for us?
No. I don't know.
Okay.
My grandmother passed away a long time ago, so I don't
know. Well, then that's easy.
Oh, yeah. That's brutal. Anyway. Yeah, no, this was a very entertaining match and very, very different. This was a very kind of straight, heavy wrestling show, and this was kind of a welcome departure from it, although looking back, Colt comes across a lot more heelish than I remember as his tormenting of poor Jimmy. But I did actually guffaw when he was sabotaging their double team maneuvers. I thought that was a great bit. And I thought Jack Evans was the standout here, both as the Greek chorus for the ongoing relationship drama. And I thought his high flying was just great here. And some people were stymied by the tent, but not Jack Evans for the finish, as he. And Trevor, you posted this on your X or Twitter account, where he walks out to the middle of the top rope, kind of holds up the tent and just flings himself, and it ends up being a somersault leg drop. I don't know if that was the intent. I don't know whether what he had in mind, but it worked and he won. And this was fun.
Yeah, it's crazy because I don't know. Like, he goes to the top rope and he's like pushing up the tent, and then it seemed like he wanted to go for the 630. Realized like I'm not going to be able to jump high enough and not catch the tent and maybe kill myself. So you think, okay, he'll just drop down. He rope walks like a few feet to get a little, so he's just staying on the ropes, and then he still almost does like the forward flip. And like you were saying, I don't know if he meant to do what he basically does, which is like just like a forward flip leg drop, or if he was still trying to do the 630 and just couldn't do enough rotations. But either way, he literally is having to push up the tent to create enough room for himself. And it's also crazy. I uploaded that, and I did not expect that to catch on. I just checked my Twitter. I uploaded that clip that has like that currently has 149,000 views on Twitter right now.
Wow.
Like, it's crazy that these shows were probably just selling like, I don't know, a few thousand DVDs, and like now 17 years later, if you like gift the right thing.
Wait.
Like
Trevor. If you gift the right thing? No, if you gift the right thing, Trevor, you're the one who would put all the attention on it. Not if I did it, it would only get views if you retweeted it.
Yeah, but I'll just say I do lots of tweets that will get like less than 10,000 views or 5,000 views or something. So like this caught on. Like, people really liked sharing this. You know, for something to get over 100,000 is not normal for me. So that was clearly, people were like, oh, that's really crazy to see Jack Evans do high flying in a really low tent that he probably shouldn't have even attempted, but he pulled off. But so yeah, this match was really just like a burst of wrestling from Jack and Ricky Reyes at the start, a burst of wrestling mostly from them at the end, and then one long Jacobs Colt angle in the middle. It was basically all Gaga comedy drama in the middle, because the entire middle of the match is just a story with Colt constantly needling Jimmy about having sex with Lacey, Jimmy constantly moping. At times he's not even like looking up from the turnbuckle. He's just got his face buried in it. He's so depressed. Lacey keeps trying to get Colt and Jimmy to work together. She forces Jimmy to tag Colt in when he doesn't want to. Colt sets Jimmy up for double team moves, but then he'll make Jimmy crash and burn, as Joe said, like a complete asshole. Like, he'll set up a guy for a hard attack clothesline, and then as Jimmy's about to hit the clothesline, Colt just like walks away so Jimmy will crash and burn. Eventually they do start actually teaming a bit better as like a real unit, and then they go for stereo clotheslines, and then their opponent drops out of the way and they hit each other. And yeah, I guess I was, Joe, thank God you said that, because about like, oh, I was surprised to see Colt looking like such a jerk, because that's something that Matt and I have been talking about on the show lately, is how like no one in the Jimmy Colt Lacey love triangle storyline comes off as sympathetic. But I also felt like, is that just something where like me and Matt are in like a moral bubble, I will say, because like the crowd, I remember liking the storyline at the time, and there's still elements of it that I like that are really entertaining. Like, even this match, it's entertaining, but I don't feel like the crowd is just fully behind Colt. Like, they love Colt. I don't think most people are feeling the way Matt and I did. So the fact that you're saying like, oh yeah, he comes off as a jerk, like, that makes me feel better, because again, yeah, this is another match where like everyone loves Colt because he's the fun, goofy, charismatic, fun-loving babyface, and he's funny. But if you actually look at the meat of what's happening here, no one is likable. Like, Lacey's getting heaps of sexist abuse from the fans, and Colt's embarrassing her and smacking her on the ass and rubbing the fact that they've had sex in Jimmy's face. And Colt, but you don't feel sympathy for her because she's like a very manipulative, abusive, selfish heel manager. Colt's like gleefully bullying Jimmy Jacobs at every turn, even though the guy's clearly having like a mental breakdown. And then Jimmy should be the sympathetic figure, except he comes off as a creep who's like stalking a girl who clearly has no interest in him. So like, nobody is likable here. But Matt, what do you think about this?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that turns me off to it, I mean, first of all, as far as a moral bubble, I think a big part of it is just like different times, you know, like I think that's, you know, this was a very, very misogynistic era in wrestling, and that's, you know, saying something for wrestling. But I think that's part of it. But yeah, it's just not the Colt Cabana that I want to watch. You know, I like Colt when he is likable, when he's a little bit goofier, when he's not as mean-spirited. I think the reason that Colt was positioned as the, quote, likable one here at the time was just, you know, he was manipulating the manipulator in Lacey and, you know, kind of getting one over on her. And showing up the weird, freaky creep, as far as like the way the character is positioned in Jimmy Jacobs. I think that was what made him the babyface here, but he was just, I don't like the version of Colt that's just like a dick and laughs at other people's misfortune. I don't think that's what Colt was. I don't think that's like the journey we went on with him in the whole Homicide feud to make him back to being that character. I don't think being like the bully jock frat boy was Colt's strong suit, at least not as a baby face. Like, I could see that more as like the heel type. That's more like what the No Remorse core were supposed to be. That's not Colt Cabana. So that's, I think, why this doesn't land with me, at least now. Yeah, they did a good job. They did an entertaining job. And as far as like, besides the comedy spots, Colt did some incredibly high hip tosses on Jimmy Jacobs. Like some of the best hip tosses I've seen in a long time. Colt also tries to shake Jimmy's hand at one point and says that he and Punk would share girls all the time. And I was trying to think, like, does CM Punk seem like he'd be into that idea? I'm not so sure, but I also, I don't know him. And definitely don't want to speak for CM Punk.
Yeah.
It's the last person who I want to make mad at me. So,
I don't know what you're talking. I don't know. I couldn't relate, man. I couldn't relate.
Yeah, but I'm just not into the storyline, so I think that took the match down. Whenever Jack Evans got to do anything, it was awesome, and he didn't get to do enough, in my opinion. Another thing that I noticed, this is a side point, but Julius Smokes wasn't here with Ricky Reyes, and he hasn't been on the show as much lately. He's not gone or anything. He'll be with Homicide, over the next, couple months. But it was something, now that Nana is gone, and Jay Lethal is no longer being booked, I think they're basically in an era where they have, like, the only, like, black performer on the roster for, like, months, at least on a regular basis, is Julius Smokes. And that's, bizarre in modern wrestling. I remember noticing this at the time. Like, I think really until Ruckus joins the roster the next summer, I think that's pretty unusual for a major American wrestling promotion to have really, like, no black wrestlers, and honestly, very few wrestlers of color in general. You have Homicide, you have Reyes, you have the stars of Noah coming in, but it's an extremely white roster for 2006. And again, like, I remember even at the time being like, that's not exactly cool. I don't know.
And we've talked about how, like, in recent months, in 2006, they had given, like, Jarrell Clark and Jay Theory some shots, and they both, like, looked good in, like, the limited opportunities they got, and then they're just never brought back, right?
Yeah, I haven't looked at, like, the results of every show, but my recollection is, like, and maybe they had, some wrestlers make some appearances, but at least as far as, like, being a member of the roster, I think it's not until Ruckus comes that they have really, like, other black wrestlers on the roster.
And also the company just paring down on managers, right? Because, like, Allison Danger also isn't around much anymore.
Yeah.
And Nana's gone. Smokes has been, right, at least during this little period, less work. Until Larry Sweeney comes in, we're kind of going a little bit lean on managers here. But, yeah, so the other thing I was just going to say is, Matt, you brought up that point. I'll just say, the people say that I will post anything or that I don't have a filter or love to muckrake, which I occasionally do, but, like, I easily could have posted a clip of Colt Cabana saying, "Jimmy, when me and Punk were buddies, we used to share girls all the time." That would have gotten attention. I am not going to put that online. You can put that on. That's a free thing for somebody else. If you want attention and unnecessary drama, you can enjoy that. I will not be doing that this time.
Trevor, I endorse your decision.
Yeah, and so, yeah, Colt, I thought the match was decently entertaining. I think, like both you and Joe said, like, I thought Jack really looked good here in his limits. There was one big spot that looked just so painful where Ricky has Jack in the Dragon Sleeper, and Colt does the quebrada on both of them as they're in the hole. I just thought, that would probably hurt with a lot of weight coming down. Colt does some other goofy sex things. Like at one point, Lacey's talking to the photographer, Mary Kate, at ringside, and he notices that they're talking. He goes, 1, 2, 3, like, hey, do you want to have a threesome? At one point, like, he knocks Jimmy flat on his back, and Colt just goes and says to him, that's how Lacey was. So, like, just very dumb, goofy humor. But after the match, on the way out, Colt spots a young child fan and says they'll have a talk about the birds and the bees when he's older. It's like, Colt, you don't need to talk to what? And then a couple fans chant "pussy whipped" at Jimmy as he holds the ropes open for Lacey after all of the abuse he took. So, yeah, again, I thought, at least the match was different. It stood out among. I've seen so many four-ways. Anytime a four-way just stands out is a minor win for me. But yeah, it not for everybody. So. Next up was Nigel McGuinness defeating Christopher Daniels via pinfall in 16 minutes, 44 seconds after he hit the Tower of London. Dave Meltzer wrote in The Observer based on live reports, crowd wasn't into the early part of the match when they did the slow build mat wrestling. The fact it was raining very hard in the tent didn't help either, but the crowd was into it at the end. And in fact, Gabe comes on the mic again at the start of this match, almost like apologetically being like, yeah, the rain's really coming down right now. And it was almost like he was like trying to like, give the guys a pass for how quiet the crowd was at the start of this match. I'll say this though, I don't know if these two just don't have great chemistry with each other, or they're just both these matches have been victims of them going easy on the first half of a double shot. But this is the second Nigel Daniels match we've seen this year that I felt was disappointing. And I actually think I like the first one they had at Weekend of Champions Night 1 this year a little bit better than this one. In fact, I often, when I see guys are having a rematch, I check my notes of past shows to see what I thought about their prior match to give myself a bit of a refresher. And here I basically wrote in that one that, like, Nigel works over Daniel's arm, Daniels works over Nigel's neck. They do the exact same thing in this match, which makes sense because Nigel has an arm submission, which, although he never uses it in this match, and Daniels has a lot of offense that targets the neck. But this match just didn't feel like it had a lot of ideas or brain power behind it. Like, almost the first half of it is Nigel working Daniel's arm on the mat with some fairly sedate technical wrestling, to the point that someone in the crowd tries to start a boring chant, but he gets immediately shouted down. And from there, we ramp up into a more action-oriented match in the second half. And it's decent, but I felt like it never gets so fun that it kind of earns the slow work in the first half. Likewise, like Daniel's selling of his arm, I thought was solid, but there's never really a big payoff, nor does the match ever get really breakneck exciting at the end. In fact, like, the most memorable part of the match to me is the end, which is something that Joe put on his Twitter. Matt, you should have put something on Twitter from the show, and we could plug your Twitter, but although we always plug your Twitter. But GIFs, Matt, video clips, that's the way of the future. Anyway, most memorable part of this match was at the very end where Nigel hits the Tower of London, but instead of doing it in the corner, he basically flips like Daniels like backwards, so like behind him, so that Daniels lands like stomach first on the top rope, and then he positions him from there into the Tower of London. It was just a really, really cool sequence. So overall, I thought this was above average, but really nothing special. This was like a lot of Daniel's singles ROH matches lately, where it's very technically decent, very professional wrestling, but also kind of boring and instantly forgettable. But maybe I'm being too hard on. Like, Joe, what'd you think?
Yeah, it was super rough there for a while, and the crowd wasn't making noise until they erupted in a huge F Green Lantern fan chant. And I don't know what he did. I think he was just being the Green Lantern fan. But it's always funny when the announcers just ignore things like this. Not that you want to stop and be like, like, well, here's who Green Lantern fan is. But, it's just, they're just like, oh, what a headlock by Nigel. There's a thunderous chant going on. It's a no-win situation. But I liked how they kind of played with the tent. Like, Nigel went for the headstand, couldn't do it because the tent was in the way. Daniels tried a moonsault later on that he couldn't do it because, he didn't have the room because of the tent. And, it got good by the end. There was some good near falls. The action picked up. Not enough to make it like anything better than pretty good. But yeah, the ending was pretty crazy as Nigel just kind of threw Daniels over his head and had to have him land properly, like have him not fall out of the ring or fall too short. And that was the most impressive part. So they certainly ended on a high note.
Matt, what'd you think?
I know that the two of you pretty much are part of the consensus. I've read other reviews and stuff. So, like, when I watched the match, I wasn't expecting it, but I actually really liked this match a lot. Like I definitely thought it was a lot better than the first match they had against each other. I would actually go 4 stars on this match.
Wow.
I thought that, yes, the heat was rough and there were, external factors to that, but I thought that the execution of everything was great. Maybe the selling of, some like the arm when Daniels takes over isn't as good as it could be, but I thought this was Daniels' best singles match in ROH, probably since the Danielson match at Night of Tribute in November 2005. That's how much I liked it. I'm really just enjoying Nigel's transition into this babyface, hard-hitting version of Nigel. Like you mentioned, Joe playing with the tent, where his legs are on the tent during the during the headstand. I really liked the spot where Daniels ducked a second rebound lariat and locked in the Koji clutch. That was one spot that really did get the crowd going a lot. I liked, that Daniels couldn't do the BME and Nigel uses his frustration for a roll up. I thought there was a lot of really cool stuff at the end. And then to me, the thing that really put it over the top with the 4-star rating is that finish. That was such an awesome finish and very clever. And yeah, I think this match is super underrated. And I really don't understand why nobody likes it, but that's fine. I'm happy to be on an island. I really, really liked it. And I might even say it was the second, or very close third best match of the night.
Wow. Yeah, I don't think we've disagreed that this much. Like it would be like, I might give this 2 3/4 stars maybe. And so this might be your equivalent of how I felt about the Nigel Colt European Rules match, which even Colt Cabana on Twitter was like, no, that wasn't a good match. I was like, no, that's a great match. But, everyone check it out because again, I did not hate the match, but I did not see it. So yeah, I'm surprised, but that's interesting because usually I'm like the outlier. So I'm, you know what, Matt, I'm glad you enjoyed it because, it's nice to have nice things. Also, Joe, I thought you made a great point about the fuck Green Lantern thing because I sometimes, or at least, I don't know, I like that you brought it up. I don't know if your point was anything other than it's funny to see crowds ignore the announcers ignore chants of fuck Green Lantern fan. But I think sometimes when I see those chants, like I try to imagine like any kind of young fan that's like, I'm going to be a student of wrestling. I'm going to watch like the old indies and just wondering like, why are people chanting fuck Green Lantern at wrestling shows? Like the superhero Green Lantern, like there are going to be fans of a future generation that have no idea who Green Lantern fan is. And the fans don't chant fuck Green Lantern fan. They chant fuck Green Lantern. So they're like, why don't you like Hal Jordan? Like a bunch of Sinestros in this crowd.
Well, they just have to, if they're watching ROH chronologically, they'll watch the Fight of the Century DVD and they'll know from Steve Corino how people feel about the Green Lantern fan, I guess.
Yes. Yeah. Again, even Steve Corino went out of his way. Like, poor Green Lantern fan, although I have a feeling he probably enjoyed it. I feel like he reveled in his Green Lantern fanness.
Yeah, who knows?
So, after the match, Nigel says into the camera, in one of the hard, not the hard cam, but one of the handheld cams at ringside, Marufuji, you're next, pal. And I was flabbergasted and so impressed because this feels like every time a wrestler speaks into the ringside cam on a Ring of Honor show, they speak into the one that Ring of Honor never uses. So this was like one of the rare times the wrestlers like cut a promo into the right camera so we actually hear and see it. Nigel then calls Daniels one hell of a wrestler, and the two men do some mutual admiration. They shake hands, they hug, they raise each other's arms, all that fun stuff. So everyone's a face still. I don't know if this was the point in the show that it happened, but because I don't know if this was exactly what intermission was, but something happens if this is intermission, something happens that we did not get to see on the DVD, which again was kind of interesting because again, this was only a 2.5 hour show. We had the time to show this, but I will go to Sean Radican's PW Torch Live report. He wrote, it was announced that they would be returning to East Windsor on December 22nd. Announcer Bobby Cruz emphasized the show would be inside, which drew a pop from some of the rain-soaked fans sitting on the outskirts of the tent. Bobby Cruz brought up the Noah wrestlers, but just as the crowd had begun to give them an ovation, ROH World Champion Bryan Danielson's music hit. Danielson Danielson came out and ran down the good people of East Windsor before getting down to business. Danielson said he would beat the crap out of all the Noah wrestlers if he had to in order to defeat Kenta in Manhattan. So yeah, obviously they gave Danielson the night off. He was supposed to wrestle Austin Aries on the show, but because of his just newly inflicted shoulder injury, decided let's let him rest up for the Kenta match the next night. You don't actually see Danielson at all on this DVD. This does not make the DVD. Now, Joe, listening back, I don't know if you remember, but listening back to you and Matt on Joe versus the World, you had a funny little note of something Danielson said about
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, a fan yells out, "You suck." And Danielson says, "I suck. You're the ones in the tent." So I thought that was just a wonderful comeback. I remember past Matt argued, well, he was in a tent too, but I countered, not for the whole night. We were in a tent.
He had a brief tent appearance, and you were like stuck in a tent for hours and paid for it.
I was trapped in a tent.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. They're the ones getting rained on. But next we get a Samoa Joe promo outside. He calls this the eve of Glory by Honor, even though it's technically night one of Glory by Honor 5, Joe.
Sorry, people of Connecticut, but even the wrestlers didn't consider this the real Glory by Honor.
Joe says he's very fond of this event. He made his Ring of Honor debut at the very first Glory by Honor. Joe says he'll be at every Glory by Honor he can possibly be at. I'll note at this point, this was the last Glory by Honor Joe was at. He was long gone by the next year's Glory by Honor, like by many months. So
we got to get Tony to bring. We got to get Tony to bring back Glory by Honor. It's the one that he hasn't brought back.
Joe says tonight he needs to make a statement to Roderick Strong. In Minnesota, Roderick Strong accomplished something that most people in the history of wrestling couldn't accomplish. He pinned Samoa Joe. But Joe says that for everybody that hopes Strong will be the next great thing, the Samoa Joe killer, they'll be disappointed because what happened in Minnesota was a fluke. Tonight he'll teach Roddy why Joe is pro wrestling. We then get a classic Gabe cut as we get more after the promo's done. And I got a kick out of how instant Joe's change was from very intense to low intensity. Like once he hears the guy's like, yeah, okay, fine. Next, someone walks up to Joe with Takeshi Morishima in tow. It's probably somebody I should recognize, probably some important higher up worker for Noah, but they've got Morishima. He says, I want to introduce Morishima to you, Joe. Joe says hello in Japanese to Morishima, shakes his hand, says, welcome to Ring of Honor. I hope you can hack it. And before he walks away, which leaves Morishima looking very annoyed and confused. So some foreshadowing for the tomorrow night.
I thought Morishima's like, hey, face when Joe made that comment was tremendous.
And then that brings us to Austin Aries defeating Davey Richards via pinfall in 17 minutes, 7 seconds after he hit a brainbuster. So again, this was supposed to be Aries versus Danielson for the world title. Got postponed for the second time. I guess this was originally that match was supposed to happen, and Anarchy in the UK got postponed then because Aries hurting his ribs. So interesting thing here, this was the first time these two wrestled in a Ring of Honor, but this was not the first time they wrestled, period, because they had actually wrestled less than 2 weeks earlier in PWG for the 2006 Battle of LA tournament, and Davey Richards actually won the tournament. So again, this is how big a year this was for Davey Richards. In this 1 year in 2006, he wins the Super 8 tournament, he wins the Battle of Los Angeles, and he gets a job with Ring of Honor, where they give him like a rare for Ring of Honor like push right off the jump. So this was like a really big time period for Davey Richards. Matt, what did you think about this match? This was another match where Gabe's trying to defend. Like at the start, Gabe comes on the commentary again. He goes, the rain's really starting to come down. You might hear the fans be more quiet as a result. And he apologized. He goes, I'm sorry that we had to hold the show in the tent. Came hours away from being canceled. Again, Gabe very apologetic here. What do you think about the match, Matt?
I guess the way that most people felt about Nigel versus Daniels is sort of how I felt about this in terms of being disappointed. Like, it was definitely very stiff, but it felt kind of repetitive to me, and I thought it took longer than Nigel versus Daniels did to, like, really pick up into the exciting point of the match. It was a bit longer, and obviously there were bigger moves involved, and there was a really great near fall near the end where Richards blocks a brainbuster and then Aries does a punt and hits a brainbuster and gets a 2 count. Like, the crowd chants that was 3. I like that was a really great spot. And, and then obviously Aries couldn't hit the 450 because of the tent, so he got the win after another brainbuster. But, I think if you like the stiffness you'll like the match a lot more than me, but I just thought it was just kind of two guys kicking each other, hitting each other without a ton of heat for a long time, and it just felt a little bit on the dull side. Still well executed, you know. Early in the match, the announcers emphasized that like these two are quote mirror images in terms of style. I don't think I really agree with that. I kind of see what they mean, but Aries, you know, while pretty stiff, is much more of like his style was much more about finesse than about strikes. I don't know. Do you think that these two are mirror images of each other in terms of style at this point?
No, I don't think so. I think Davey Richards was much more growly meathead, where Aries was kind of like a jack of all trades kind of guy.
Yeah, I did write this about the Gabe comment. I said, Jimmy Bauer comes on the mic to apologize about the tent and the rain and water on the camera. Real professional. And then I wrote, I can't tell if I'm being sarcastic or not with that comment. I don't know if that was like real professional or if it was like, yeah, real professional. Still not sure, but you can decide for yourself. But yeah, I don't know. It was funny that there was a spot where Aries ducked a forearm after they exchanged it, hit an elbow, and then they both clothesline each other with like, you know, and fall on top of each other, and they're both down. And the only thing I could think of, this is very different from the All In show I just went to, because when they both hit a clothesline, they didn't pin each other. So now that's what I'll always think when I see two guys clothesline each other. And then the other funny thing that I heard on commentary was, as they traded strikes in the middle of the ring, Jared David goes, "This is a throwback to the origins of our business. Two guys beating each other up in a tent." And Prazak calls it a carnival-like atmosphere. And I can't tell, is that putting the show over? I'm not sure if it is. But yeah, I thought this match was a little more boring than I would have liked, even though the moves and stuff were cool.
So I agree with you, Matt, on this match. I like this match a little bit more than the Nigel Daniels match. I would call this a very low good. But yeah, I don't think these two gave a match for people to go crazy about. You know, it's another one of those matches that not only does it not have a story going into the match or within the match itself, it doesn't really even have a defined face or heel. You're just left with moves, and it's a decent mid-tempo match that I never got bored by, but never really kicks into high gear, although it does have that one you mentioned, really hot near fall on the Brainbuster right at the end. You know, maybe the tent limited things a little bit. Aries ends up using the Brainbuster as his finisher rather than try a 450, so he just knows he's not going to be able to do it here. Davey did do a dive to the floor, can't with the grass on his back, which is a fun visual to be like, oh man, you get reminded like, oh, this is you're actually outside, you know. And I wrote in my notes, even though Davey Richards wrestled part of this match with his back having a bunch of grass on it, it would still be the back in this match I would most want to eat food off of, because Aries had a real case of back knee going on, because like it was his back was looking like MJF's shoulder did on Dynamite this week. But
the back you would most like to eat food off of.
If I had to eat a dinner off either of these guys' backs during this day and time, Davey Richards all the way, man. Even with a little bit of grass. That's just some salad.
Trevor, I told you this podcast should never be so sexy.
So I did like the bit of the mat work to start, and honestly, one of my favorite parts of this match was there was 3 instances of this match of Aries kind of suckering Davey into things. Like there's times where, you know, Davey's wanting to get into strike battles, and Aries will either like cut him off with a drop kick to the knee, or one time he's even goes up to Davey's like, just kick me harder. And when Davey goes to then throw a kick, Aries immediately just grabs it and turns it into his like a knee breaker back suplex comment. I like stuff like that. Like, it didn't make Aries seem like a heel. It just made him seem smart, and Davey to be kind of like, you know, again, more of the meathead. He's just very aggressive and maybe not always thinking straight. But Joe, what'd you think?
I actually like this quite a bit more than both of you. I thought there was kind of a natural story where Aries' ribs were all taped up, but you know, they said at the start Davey didn't want to attack it, he wanted to out wrestle him, but he soon kind of was forced to go that way. That provided a nice through line through the match, and they just beat the hell out of each other. Like, I know the tent was limiting in some ways, but you can still just kick the shit out of each other, which they did. And the near fall you mentioned, it looked like Davey didn't kick out to me, like something like, I don't know if he got knocked loopy for a second or what, but like they still wrestled for a bit. They didn't go right to like an immediate finish. They still did a couple other near falls, but finished. So that was kind of the only black mark. But I enjoyed this quite a bit.
Yeah, that moment where Prazak is like, what a good sport Richards has been not going after Aries versus. It's one of those commentary things. I always feel so bad for the commentators where they say something and then like seconds later it gets contradicted, because right after Prazak says like, what a good sport Richards has been, not going after the ribs. Seconds later, Davey knees Aries in the ribs, which is like the first time the match he hits him, and Prazak has to be like, well, I cursed that, and speaking of great clips uploaded to Twitter, Joe, you uploaded a absolutely insane spot in this match where Davey Richards does the handspring off the ropes, where he then goes and does the big spinning kick, except like in mid handspring, in midair, Aries drop kicks Davey right in like between the shoulder blades, neck, head, hits that like real contact. It looks incredible. Like the pinpoint accuracy looked brutal. Great looking, cool spot. Also, I know somewhere in the crowd tried to start an Austin Powers chant during this match, and he immediately gets booed down. So I was just like, oh, someone's named Austin. I know a reference. So good on you, crowd. You did the right move here. So after the match, Aries helps Davey to his feet. The two shake hands. A fan yells at Aries to enjoy the tag titles for the next 24 hours. Aries tells the fan he has something on his chin, his other chin, and then he calls him a fat fuck. So Austin Aries. It's intermission time.
That tells me that Austin Aries was like shoot mad that he was going to be dropping the title.
I was like, that's pretty gotten to for like a pretty innocuous line. Like you'd have to imagine that most wrestlers get shouted something worse than that, like, and more personal most shows. So the idea like you're going to lose the titles in a day, like, hey, you fat piece of crap. Like what? Whoa. It's intermission time. Gary Michael Capetta's here. I wrote Gary Michael Capetta is here and backstage or back tent or back something. He's with Lacey, Jimmy Jacobs, Colt Cabana. Gary wants to know what's going on. Are they a team or not a team? Lacey says that all that matters is they're getting wins for Lacey's Angels. Colt says he's about getting something. Jimmy Jacobs is bummed out. He gets reamed out by Lacey for what she calls a pathetic performance tonight. Jimmy apologizes very meekly. Colt jokingly calls Jimmy a jerk. Jimmy mopes and Gabe says cut. Promo's over. Colt then immediately goes to Gary and Michael Capetta and goes, GMC, you are the man. And then shakes hands with him, which made me laugh. Like he's so enthusiastic. And then he compliments Gary's tie, and Gary very self-deprecatingly goes like, oh, I thought it was a little conservative. It's a very cute moment on the show. Then Lacey wants to know what Colt's plans are for tonight. Colt thought they'd go on a little date, a little steak and shake, maybe walk on the beach, then go to his room at the Super 8.
Isn't it a little bit late to like go to steak and shake and walk by the bay? Because that's what he said. It was like, I don't know, he's walking, but it's gonna be like probably like, I don't know, 1 a.m. by the time you get to that bay. Be careful, kids.
Lacey thinks that sounds like a good idea and walks away with him. Jimmy tries to follow them, but Lacey tells him, go to the gym or something. And Cole just goes, easy, weirdo. So we're continuing the storyline. But yeah, I think one of the funny things in this storyline, too, is the idea that, like, Lacey's really into Colt Cabana. And, like, everything about the Lacey character is, like, she's, like, she got remember when she first started, like, Lacey's Angels with Special K, and she got them to, like, dress up better and stuff like that. Like, she's supposed to be, like, a manager that's, like, looks down on wrestling fans and maybe likes things a little bit better. And she's, like, really impressed that Colt's like, yeah, we can go to Steak and Shake, and then we can go to the Super 8. Like,
well, yeah, I think this is, like, the part that, like, that makes Colt the babyface to the fans. It's, like, he kind of, like, exposes Lacey as, like, she kind of makes her regress a little bit into, like, just kind of, like, being impressed by these unimpressive things, and she's not really as professional as she purports to be when she's smitten by, I guess, a guy that she likes. Like, I mean, I don't know if they even thought it through that much, but that's the logic that I'm seeing there.
And that brings us to coming back for intermission. Delirious defeats Shane Hagedorn by submission in 6 minutes, 22 seconds when he makes Shane tap out to the Cobra stretch. This is one of those typical easing people back from intermission matches. I felt like Delirious gave Shane a slightly surprising amount of offense, but really this is just a showcase win for Delirious. A lot of basic exchanges. Nothing goes wrong, but nothing special. It's perfectly average. The crowd continues to be really into Delirious at this stage of his career. He's like a real crowd-pleasing act at this time. I think the highlight for me of this entire match was Shane at one point, he's in a hold and he's selling in the hold, and Delirious is yelling gibberish at him. And while he's selling in pain, simultaneously you can hear Shane Hagedorn screams out, "I don't know what you're saying!"
It sounded like Delirious said something like, "What are you going to do about it?" or something like that.
I just liked it. Like, he was legit still selling, but also befuddled. Like, just please don't ask me. I thought that was a cute moment. I don't know if you guys had it. It's always weird, like, when you throw, what do you guys think about a 6-minute largely a squash match? Do you guys have any thoughts about this one?
My thoughts are, I think that Shane Hagedorn's heel music, like the Alice in Chains song he comes out to, is very, very good heel music. Like, really sets a good tone for that. Also mentioned that Prazak was noting that Hagedorn has been sucking up to Adam Pearce carrying his bags around, which will, set the table for the angle the next night. But otherwise, I thought this was a fine, basic, whatever they, like Hagedorn, backed him into the corner and grabbed, a rope burn. Like, Hagedorn was very good at the very basic stuff that he was doing at this point. And that's a good thing for a, fairly new wrestler to do, is really master the basics. And he was doing a good job with that. But yeah, I thought this was just a fine, basic post-intermission match that isn't literally a squash, but also is not dramatic in any way. They did about as good as you would want them to do in this position.
I'll just add that, intermission was 8 minutes, because I don't think there was anything for anyone to really do. I don't think they were like merch tables or anything like that. They were very much in let's get this over with mode.
Where were bathrooms? Like, did you have to go inside?
I think you could go inside if you wanted to. I don't know if I imagine they would let you in for that, but yeah. So and as for the match, I did appreciate the contrast between Delirious and the more plain heel antics of Hagedorn, and I guess Delirious is the top of the class now, so good for him.
I did like the Shane Hagedorn does a fist drop from the very first turnbuckle and prays tongue-in-cheekily. He's like, "Oh, Shane Hagedorn's a great high flyer." So I like that little needling of the heel. But next, we get an ad for the FIP DVD entitled Strong versus Evans, so getting the Joe versus Kobashi treatment. And I remember this being one of the more hyped FIP DVDs, just because Strong and Evans hadn't wrestled in ROH to this point. They would a few times after this. And this was one of the, I think this was, I would be interested in how well this sold, because I remember this being one of people being "Oh, I normally don't buy FIP DVDs, but I would really want to see them wrestle."
I got this one, and it was a good match. It probably was overhyped just because that's how Gabe sold these DVDs, but it was definitely a good match and definitely one of the more buzzy FIP shows of the era.
And this is another strange FIP DVD ad where they show clips from the show, but not a single wrestling move. I don't know what they're trying to hide at this point, but it feels like we've seen now, recently, 3 different FIP DVD ads where, they're going out of their way to not show any wrestling action. Just ring entrances.
Yeah, it's basically just "Hey, everybody, you want to see what a small crowd looks like?"
Yeah. Clearly, the thing you want to focus on FIP show is the crowd size and the ambiance. Those are going to be the things that really
it took place in an actual... Yeah, it took place in an actual building, so they were probably spotlighting that.
That is definitely an added perk. Next up was the semi-main event. Samoa Joe defeated Roderick Strong via pinfall in 19 minutes, 14 seconds after he hit a Death Valley driver off the second turnbuckle. Dave wrote in The Observer that Joe pinned Strong in 1915 in a stiff match that was generally considered the best match on the show. Joe hit a scary-looking Death Valley driver, and boy, howdy did he, off the top rope for the win. Dave wrote, this was the match Joe got hurt in. Now, I looked throughout the rest of The Observer. Maybe I didn't look good enough. I couldn't find anything else that mentioned that Joe was hurt. He does wrestle the next night, but apparently Joe gets hurt in this match. I couldn't even notice watching it that he got hurt. But from one Joe to another, Joe, what do you think about your friend Joe? And Joe, do you think more fondly of wrestlers named Joe because they share your name? And what do you think about this match?
Are you asking if I close my eyes when everyone's chanting Joe and imagine it's for me? No.
Yeah, see, that's something I don't ever get.
Never. Yeah. No, I don't. Yeah, unless I don't know. Ricochet is. Wait,
yeah.
is that? No,
you
no.
Never, you never went to a Trevor Lee match, Trevor?
No, I can't say I have. And yeah, Trevor Lee would have been my shot. Or like Joe said, if Ricochet ever goes by Trevor Mann, but yeah, this was
Did I ever tell you that I think I did show you this, that like ChatGPT or one of those chat bots said, if you ask what Through the Years is, they said it was a show hosted by Matt Feuerstein and Trevor Mann. And I thought it was very funny that it knew my name but not yours.
Well, so many Trevors in the wrestling business. You've got like a whopping 3. Well, 2. I'm not in the business. If you include the Twitter sphere, then you got at least 4. So, Joe, again, we got sidetracked, but
Sorry.
For some people, I would, this was a match I think a lot of people would say was the best match on the show, but I think there's probably at least one other contender, or if you're Matt, maybe, I don't know if even Matt would say Nigel Daniels was better, but I would say I'll say this. If I like Nigel Daniels as much as Matt liked that match, that would have been my match of the night. What do you think about this match?
Yeah, I thought this rocked. This is when I thought the tent setup actually helped, because I know they did a brief dive to the floor, but there was a real claustrophobic feel to this match, and like there was nowhere for Roddy to run because Joe is just like the biggest monster in wrestling at this point. And it's a match where you just want them to beat the hell out of each other, and that's basically what they did. And the finish was especially brutal, as noted. Joe gave him a top rope Death Valley driver, and Roddy, I posted this on Twitter and said, he probably did need a neck brace after this. And I remember Joe just didn't even bother hooking his leg because it was like, no, this is clearly the end. So, commentary also mentioned Zeus during the match, during I think like a neck ringer or something, which I would not have predicted going into it. But no, I thought this was great.
Matt, what do you think about this one?
Well, yeah, first of all, commentary talking about Zeus, that tells you this was like the first part of like the commentary shift. Because when you get to those shows where you could tell that they're like at the end and they're exhausted, it's like they're not even thinking of fun stuff like that. They're just like, yeah, that was a move. Oh, he hit a dive to the crowd. Now he's going for the, it's just like they're still awake at this point. No, yeah, I thought before this show, this was like a pretty hyped show. Like this, like Glory by Honor Night 1. Like obviously Night 2 is the big one, but like there was a lot of anticipation for this one. And I feel like in the end, these were the only 2 guys on the night that treated the show like it wasn't a B show. Like this was Joe being like full Samoa Joe. He wasn't holding back. And that's been a long time since you've seen that from Joe in a singles match. Even the Danielson match, which was like a big deal match, he wasn't being like full Joe. He was like being like 80%. This I think was 100% Joe. The super hard chops, at one point Strong is arguing with a heckler and telling him he fucked her mom, which, I wonder if it's true, but if it wasn't, that's a rude thing to say. And even if it was, you just don't say it in public. But obviously him and Aries, they were just not having fun with this crowd tonight.
You earnestly saying, I wonder if that, you were so earnest when you said, I wonder if that was true.
Trevor?
That might be the most adorable thing you've ever done.
Trevor, I just want to make clear, I was not earnest when I said that. I was kidding about it.
I know, but you came off that way. Go back. It was like, I wonder if that was true.
Yeah, but the hard kicks from Joe, classic Samoa Joe. Joe even does some interesting chin lock variations, like almost like a dragon sleeper. When you're doing interesting chin lock variations, that's something that's gonna, excite old Matt. What I was.
Young Matt did not bring this up on the Joe versus the World episode, but old Matt is more refined.
That's right. No, but they're playing the hits in a lot of points, but they're doing them with just like greater intensity and stiffness and energy. Like when Joe does the face wash and the running boot, like he's really feeling it, and he even does a second one because the crowd chants one more time, and they end up trading forearms mid-ring, and Joe's are definitely harder, but Strong stays up and starts chopping, so Joe slaps him. There's a point where Joe charges, but Strong catches him and hits a backbreaker, which of course makes him sell his knee, but he gets a 2 count off of that. The "This is awesome" chant comes after Joel rolls out of a stronghold attempt, but Strong drop kicks him to the floor and hits the spinning dive. They end up with Strong kicks Joe, goes right into the STF, into the crossface. Joe goes for a clothesline. Strong catches him in the half Nelson backbreaker. Then Strong actually hits a superplex in spite of the tent, which I think makes it extra impressive. Can't quite hold the stronghold, so he gets Joe in the fireman's carry and hits the double knee gut buster. But then Joe sweeps the legs through, and Strong takes a really great bump, and Strong fights out of the muscle buster, hits a jumping boot to the middle rope. He goes for the Gibson driver, can't quite get it, turns it into almost like a butterfly suplex. Like, I think that was probably a shoot, right? Like, he actually just couldn't get the Gibson driver, but he wanted to. I don't know. What do you think? Do you think that was selling?
I was going to ask you. I think it has to be selling because, remember, this is playing on. I mean, no, not selling. I think this is a shoot, like you said, like, because when you think about it, this match, the whole reason this match is happening is because Roddy got the upset pin on Joe in that Aries and Strong versus Joe and Whitmer tag recently. And that match ended with him pinning Joe with the Gibson driver. And I think Joe didn't get up great for that even. And so you think, well, you would definitely want to reference that and do that spot again, right? Like you'd get a big near fall if he goes for it again. And he goes for it and Joe drops to his knees, and then they just do a move that, yeah, like you said, like that butterfly suplex that I don't think Strong does very often. To me, that felt like they tried to do it to, do the reference, and maybe Joe just decided, you know what, I'm probably not going to get good on this. It might just be easier if I just jump to the side on a suplex. That's my theory too. If you're thinking that way, that's what I would think too.
Yeah, I agree with you about that. And then of course they go to the finish, and that finish was something. That Death Valley driver off the middle rope, like, that was insane. It's very rare that you get a holy shit chant after a match is over, and this one got it. And I thought this match delivered on the expectations. I actually liked the early part of the match the best. Like, I thought just that intensity of the basic stuff, and the crowd was going nuts for it, like way hotter than anything else on the show. And maybe it slowed down a little bit as it went, but that's just because they were working so hard at the beginning. So I thought this was a really great match. And I was not disappointed at all.
So I'll say this. Normally on Through the Years, I've been shocked at how well everything is held up, and almost everything that I remember being great, I still think is great. This was a show that made me feel old in a way, because I feel like everything on the show, I think I liked better when I saw it, 17 years ago. Everything was like a notch down. Like, I would say this was probably my match of the night, but I would say it was like 3.5 stars. There was like a lot of hard hitting and good action, but I also felt like there was something that was strangely empty to this match. I do think Joe was trying hard, but I also, like you said, Matt, but I also thought he looked kind of tired. Like, there's the moment in the middle of the match where he has Roddy in a hold, and then very shortly after he puts him in the neck vice, which you never see Joe do 2 holds back to back or pull out the neck vice. And I was kind of thinking, like, is he just tired right now? And I guess I was thinking Roddy is known for being like one of the big cardio machines in wrestling who can just go and go and go. And I thought, well, maybe he's kind of blown Joe up a bit. I don't even know if Joe was just resting or what. And then again, that spot later where Joe, it looked like Roddy was trying to get him up for the Gibson driver. And then maybe we're just thinking too much, reading too much into it, but it did kind of feel like Joe was like, you know what, I can't do this right now. But, it is lots of hard hitting. I do think they gave one of the best, like you said, Matt, like the best effort of the night. And I think the fun of this match for me was Roddy doing so much of his usual offense despite Joe's size. Like, you usually don't see Joe getting thrown around a lot. And, Roddy does the leg capture backbreaker. He does the half Nelson backbreaker. He does a version of the Falcon Arrow here. He tries to do the Gibson driver and then does the butterfly suplex. Like, Joe is leaving his feet quite a bit in this match. And I think that's part of the fun, is like Roddy doesn't limit his offense here. He's doing the kind of Roddy suplexes and backbreakers to big ol' Samoa Joe. And the end, I agree with Joe. Like, great. Here's how great that Death Valley driver is. This match is largely inconsequential. There's no real story. It's set up from one match. People don't remember. There's no feud going out of this or anything like that. This show is mostly remembered for Kenta in a Tenta, the tent and all that. I remember that Death Valley driver. I hadn't seen this match in over a decade, and I still vividly remember that Death Valley driver. It is just great looking, brutal. And like Matt said, I think that's a great point too, Matt, that like, how often do you see a match end with a move that's so wild that the crowd gives the holy shit chant after the 3 count and the match is over? Like, I can't remember the last time I saw a match where that happened, where a match just ends on that kind of crazy exclamation point. And also it's kind of a throwback to like what we saw from Joe in 2003, 2004, where Joe wasn't just winning matches with the Muscle Buster or choke. He went through a period where he probably won, like, in a 1 year span, used like 7 different moves to finish matches. And this was like another one where, like, when have you ever seen Joe break out like a second rope Death Valley driver? And it was just really cool. Like, I love that he decided, you know what, I'm going to do this. And just a really cool thing. So, yeah, you got. I bet you this is one of those matches I got from watching it where I was like, I enjoyed this a fair bit, but I could tell. I think everyone who watched this other than me is probably going to like this like a notch more than me. And that brings us to the main event. Kenta and Marufuji take on, or Kenta and Naomichi Marufuji, I'm not going to deprive the man of both his names, defeat the Briscoes, Jay and Mark, in 20 minutes, 25 seconds, when Kenta pinned Mark Briscoe after a go-to-sleep. Meltzer wrote in The Observer, match was said to be excellent. Both of the last 2 matches were described as 4 stars or better, with the latter match being equivalent to the last 20 minutes of your normal 30-minute Kenta and Marufuji match. Joe, what would you say? I don't know if I would completely agree with that, but Joe, what did you think? Like, was this probably your first time you ever got to see Kenta and Marufuji? I mean, live? This is
live. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. But I'd certainly followed them. It was a real thrill to see them live. They were such a great team. They're so cool in the sense that, you get the sense they don't have a lot in common probably. And maybe they don't even like each other, but they work together because they do such good work. Like Matt and Trevor on Through the Years. So,
yeah. Our bitter feud. Whenever the mics are off, man, it's just fumes.
For a long time, this just kind of went back and forth action. No real extended heat or, not really a hot tag. It was very good action, but it felt a bit formless. And the crowd just surprisingly not super into it either, though, it had been given the atmosphere and the circumstances, I can't really kill them for that. I thought the last 5 minutes or so, they went all out with action. The crowd came alive. It was awesome. It was at that level that Dave Meltzer talked about, but just for the last 5 minutes. This is when I think the setup hurt it, no dives or kind of anything like that. I wonder if they kind of had to structure it differently. But it was good, but it was not like I remember this being a lot better live, and it's just like, it was good, but you would think with these 4 you would have like an incredible match, and this was not that.
I think your thoughts pretty much exactly echo mine. Like, I would put this maybe a slightly below the Joe Roddy match, but that's kind of disappointing when you consider that this is a dream match. Even in this young stage of these guys' careers, Marufuji and Kenta were considered like one of the great tag teams in the world. The Briscoes, one of the great tag teams of I think the last 20 years, and it's good but not great. And like you said, Joe, there's not I would say like there's a lot of ways to structure a match. Like some matches start super slow, maybe like at a 2 out of 10, and then they slowly ramp up through the entire match until they peak at a 10 right near the end. And then other matches, they might start out hot, like at an 8 or 9 to get the crowd into it at the jump. And then they kind of ramp down to maybe like a 4 or 5, and then they slowly build back up to a 9 or 10. And there are lots of variations of that, lots of peaks and valleys that can happen in matches in different orders. This is a match I think that for like the first 15 minutes, from minute 1 to minute 15, it's just a 7. And it's never not a 7. Like in terms of pace and action and intensity, it's just consistently a 7, which is a good number. But there's something about that gets kind of numbing. And like you said, there's no hot tag. There's no like momentum in this match. It is just back. I don't think anyone in this match gets momentum for more than a minute at most, and often much less than that. There's frequent tags. It's your move, my move, but it's not at an absolute breakneck pace. It's at a 7. And it's good work, but just something numbing about that. And it's another one of those matches where I feel like the theme for me watching this show was like, there are a bunch of matches where I felt like I probably liked this like 1 star more 17 years ago. This is one of the first Ring of Honor shows I've watched where I did feel like time, maybe because some of these maybe has taken a little bit off the top of it. I don't know why it's this show. Maybe I just have a thing for tense that hurts them. I don't know. But then, like in those final 5 minutes, they do the typical tag thing where they ignore tags, they flip the switch. It does get more exciting. I still don't quite think it's the absolute like, oh my god, barn burner, but it gets pretty darn good by the end there. And of course, this match is most notable for on commentary. Dave Prizak at one point just out of nowhere says "Kenta in a Tenta," which tickles Jared David to no effect, to no end. And Matt, you talk about the guys getting punchy during the long recordings of commentary. That's more IWA Mid-South than Prazak. Prazak usually does not like loosen his tie and let his guard down in ROH, and for him just to go out there and go Kenta in a Tenta, maybe get a little punchy, but that's like the funny part of this. And also, shout out to the fan who, in the home stretch of the match, as it's at its most exciting point, you can hear one fan yell out, "Who's the legal man?" Which is like, I'm glad one fan who's like, "This is what I'm concerned with. Who's the legal?" Like, Jim Cornette probably wants to meet that fan after the show and give him a hearty handshake. But Matt, what'd you think about the match?
Yeah, I'm on the same page as the two of you. I think even at the time, I found this disappointing when I got the DVD. Because, yeah, this is a total dream match. And, the Dave wrote, like, it's like the last 20 minutes of a Kenta versus Marufuji match in Japan. And, like, I remember some of those great Kenta and Marufuji 2003, 2004 matches. Those built and had these insane finishing sequences that lasted a really long time. And, like, this didn't have anything close to that. And, I do wonder if, like, this was a situation where they were like, all right, this just situation sucks. We have this tent with water on it, and we just got to get the hell out of here. And they rushed through a match. And, like, if it was inside, they would have done more. I don't know. But, I know that Kenta and Marufuji could have done more than this. And I know the Briscoes, I mean, even just in terms of the finishing sequence, the ones that they had against Aries and Strong and Richards and Seidel in England were more epic than the ones they had against Kenta and Marufuji. So while this was a really good match in some ways, you're right, it was totally formless, which is, I think, a pet peeve I've had about some of the Briscoes ROH matches in this era in general. They definitely get better at that. But just like the constant back and forth, it almost made me think, like, did Kenta and Marufuji just let the Briscoes lay out this match? And because you wouldn't think that, because, they're the bigger, Ken and Marufuji are the bigger stars, but it almost felt like they didn't really put their stamp on this at all. It was just sort of like okay, we're going to have a hard-hitting, exciting match, but we're not going to put our most creative attributes to work to make this something special. It didn't feel like they were really going for something special here. That's why I thought that, like, when I mentioned Joe and Strong were the only ones that kind of treated this show like it wasn't a B show, because I don't think this was an A show performance by either team. This was like a B plus show performance by them. And so they had a very good but not particularly great match. And I don't know. Do you think that things would have been different if the building was where they were wrestling instead of in this tent where they kind of felt the need to hurry in and out?
Yeah, I don't know how much of that is the building versus maybe even just it's the B show, even though this was supposed to be like a major B show.
Yeah, it wasn't the way, like, at least in the hype and the anticipation, it wasn't thought of as a B show. You know what I mean? Like, It feels like a B show when you watch it for a lot of reasons, but in advance, I wasn't expecting it to be a B show.
But you could say, like, Kenta and Marufuji both have big singles matches the very next night. So in the back of their mind, they might be thinking, we don't need to go to the absolute final gear on this because we got that's what we got to do tomorrow night. I will say, I don't think these guys, like, completely mailed it in or anything. I think they gave a very good, honest physical effort. But going to kind of what you were saying, it's like their mental effort. Yeah, like they weren't going the extra mile to make this match really memorable. It was just like, we're going to just do some good, honest, hard work for 20 minutes. And maybe not.
All the physicality was on point, and, like, they definitely worked hard in that sense. I totally agree. Don't want to take anything away from that.
Yeah. But maybe, they just didn't put maybe that extra imagination. And I do kind of get what you're saying, where maybe I almost have this kind of vibe of just like, maybe almost on autopilot, where, like, we're going to let the Briscoes lead this and we're just going to trade stuff. And, after 20 minutes, that's a good amount of, that'll be enough for the crowd to be happy, and then we'll go home, but, this was also interesting.
This is the first Kenta ROH match where I can say it didn't feel like he was putting his real best foot forward.
Yeah. And this was also an interesting match from the standpoint of, this was Marufuji right after he had won the GHC heavyweight title, which was Noah's, heavyweight title. And, Noah was not in the habit of giving their top title usually to junior heavyweights, and I did feel like he did look like he had a little bit more swagger in this match. Like he usually plays second fiddle to Kenta in Ring of Honor, but I did feel like he was a little bit more feeling himself in this match. Not that he's ever been bad in the limited bits of Ring of Honor, but I felt like I noticed him a bit more here. And Muhammad Yone with his great afro was at ringside from Noah, as was Sugiura.
And they actually mentioned Shibata because they mentioned that's who Kenta had been teaming with more in Japan lately.
Yeah, so we were getting more of the Noah guys there, and that would set up, again, an angle for tomorrow night. Kenta in a Tenta. Jay Briscoe goes to shake Kenta's hand before the match, and Kenta just flips him off because Kenta's a naughty boy. And then later, Jay takes like this really huge, brutal-looking tiger suplex from Kenta. So Kenta really just not being a nice man to Jay Briscoe on this night. But after the match, the crowd chants "Arigato." Yone, Sugiura, and Morishima all join Kenta and Marufuji in the ring as the crowd gives them one more Noah chant, and that ends the show. So we get a rare for ROH, doesn't happen very frequently, no post-match promos, no angle even, and it kind of goes to what Joe was talking about earlier, where this, between the 2.5 hour runtime, the fact that there was basically almost no intermission live, this very much was a show where it went shorter probably than they intended if it had not been held under a rainy tent. A rainy tent, I was about to say. A rainy tent. My God.
Ew.
So, yeah, it did feel like just let's, this whole show felt like, let's give the people a good enough effort. We don't want to shortchange them, but also let's get this over with. And they got it over with. So, that was Glory by Honor 5, Night 1. Joe, what do you think about the show, especially, again, revisiting after all these years? You saw it live. You did a whole podcast about it. Now, 17 years later, you're doing it. Will you be doing a podcast about it again 17 years from now with a different group of people?
God, I hope
with
not.
me, or with me again.
Sad.
Yeah.
Oh, no. Yeah, third time the
charm.
The rewatch of Through the Years. In terms of the show, I think it's certainly a famous show in Ring of Honor history. You mentioned the tent show. People know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
What makes it famous kind of hurts the show overall. Like live, this wasn't even 3 hours live. This was very much kind of a get in and get out kind of scenario. I think, there's good wrestling here. I think there's nothing bad per se. Stuff doesn't, several of the matches don't get to the heights you hope they would. But there's, it was a breeze to watch. I thought and the show's always going to be overshadowed by the next night because that's one of the, very memorable Ring of Honor shows of the era. So, I mean, if you toss on Honor Club, you'll have a decent enough time. It's, it's in a tent. It's really weird. And, there's some good stuff. Certainly Roddy Joe, I thought, was the standout match of the night. But like I said, nothing all that bad. You can breeze through it. So it was certainly a memorable night in my Ring of Honor live viewing.
Yeah, I would say I enjoyed this show, but going back to what I said earlier, I think this is one of the only shows I've ever seen on Through the Years where I do feel like maybe time has changed my view a bit, where I feel like some of these things have maybe aged a little bit, and I also feel like maybe some people will enjoy some of the stuff more than I did, but I think it's worth a watch. This is one of those rare shows we've never been able to say this very often. We haven't been able to say this very often for any shows we've covered on Through the Years, which is, this is like a curiosity. Like, it's worth a watch, like going to what you said, Joe, because it's just so weird to see this many huge stars of the future wrestling in a goddamn tent that's barely almost touching their heads. Like, I feel like the show is a fairly good show. It's not a great show, but it's like a breezy watch, which, again, another weird thing for Ring of Honor. There's rarely been a Ring of Honor show this short. So if there's any Ring of Honor DVD that can be called like a breezy watch in that sense, it might be this one. And I would say it's almost worth a watch regardless of quality, just because when are you going to see things like the Briscoes versus Kenta and Marufuji in a tent? Where are you going to see multiple wrestlers like having to adjust on the fly to do high flying in a tent, so that their heads don't touch? Where are you going to see guys doing dives into grass? Like, it's just, it's a weird curiosity that Ring of Honor has rarely had. Matt, what do you think?
Definitely this was disappointing, I think, in the sense that, like, this was built up as a bigger show than it ended up being. But the fact that it is a curiosity, that it has that quote carnival-like atmosphere that the announcers mentioned, that it still does have in my opinion, a pretty high-level match with Joe and Strong, that kind of gives it its ROH pedigree, that, you would need a great match to kind of hold up. To the fact that it is a breezy, quick watch, I still think, for a disappointing B-show, it's still good. And it's still fun and interesting and weird and all that stuff. Now, that said, I do believe that I have an award to give out.
Matt, it is time for the Matt F. Trophy.
That's right. And so for me, the main standout, exciting things on the show were the fact that there were these two, in my opinion, really memorable finishes to a couple of matches that I liked. And I was kind of going back and forth between which finish would get the Matt F. Trophy. The Samoa Joe and Roderick Strong finish was brutal and memorable and got a holy shit chant, but I'm actually going to give the Matt F. Trophy to the finish of the Nigel McGuinness versus Christopher Daniels match because I thought it had that extra level of creativity, something that I don't remember ever seeing before or since. That suplex of Daniels, stomach first onto the top rope leading into the Tower of London. I thought that was just such a cool and different and unexpected finish that I think it deserves a trophy. So that is the winner of the Matt F. Trophy.
I believe that's the first of the three Matt F. Trophies. Choice I would say is somewhat out of the box. It's a interesting choice, Matt. And for those who want to see that spot without having to watch the show, it's on Joe Gagne's Twitter feed. And Joe, that brings us to you. It's time to plug things. So why don't you plug that Twitter feed and anything else you want to plug?
Yes, you can follow my Twitter, X, whatever, just at Joe Gagne, Gagne. And for other audio adventures, you can listen to my wrestling trivia podcast, 5-Star Match Game, hosted on the Voices Wrestling Podcasting Network. Matt and Trevor have been on a bunch of times, along with our good friend Justin Shapiro. So always check those shows out, and that'll be it. And thanks again for having me on. We finally got to this one. It felt like it's been building for a long time.
Yes. Thank you, Joe. Yeah, this was great. And the last thing that, I apologize if anyone hears a motorcycle in the background. It's not me riding it, I swear. But the last thing I do want to say before Trevor wraps it up is I just want to give one more thanks to the Pro Wrestling Only Podcast Network for helping us get on the map, and everybody who is involved in that podcast network, and for everyone who's listened to us on it.
Yeah, thank you guys again so much. It was such an honor to be part of it. If you guys want to get in contact with us, that's ThROH The Years at gmail.com, THROH for through, at Trevor Dame on Twitter, at Mayor MGF on Twitter. We're also on YouTube if you want to listen there. But from here on out, after this episode, it'll be either our own feed on all the podcast apps or YouTube. And next time on the show, we will be covering, this is one of the big ones, Glory by Honor 5, Night 2, KENTA Not In A TENTA, KENTA In A Buildinga, taking on Bryan Danielson in one of the big matches of the year, plus just a loaded card, a great atmosphere. It's a show that a 17 years younger Matt Forstein said on somebody else's podcast by the name of Joe Gagne that it was the greatest Ring of Honor show he had ever seen. We'll see if it holds up in 17 years. It's going to be one of the big episodes. So, until next time, have a good time. Have a great time.